What if I told you that a player who spent more time in hospital beds than on football pitches somehow made it to the biggest tournament in the world? A player who missed hundreds of matches through injury. A player who went from surgery to surgery. A player who was constantly surrounded by controversy, criticism, and headlines that had nothing to do with football. And yet, when the final squad list for the 2026 World Cup was announced, there it was. Neymar. Now, before anyone gets angry, this isn't about whether Neymar is talented. We already know he is. At his peak, he was one of the most electrifying footballers the sport has ever seen. The real question is something much more shocking. How did a player with barely any consistent football, endless injury setbacks, public controversies, fan confrontations, and questions about his commitment still manage to secure a place on Brazil's most important squad? Because when you look at the timeline, it almost doesn't make sense. Every time Neymar seemed ready to make a comeback, another injury appeared. Every time he started winning fans back, a new controversy exploded. Every time critics finally gave him credit, he somehow found a way to create another headline. At certain points, it looked impossible that he would even be fit enough to play professional football, let alone represent Brazil at a World Cup. Yet somehow, against all logic, against all expectations, and against everything that had happened over the previous 2 years, Neymar found himself exactly where he wanted to be. Was it loyalty? Was it reputation? Was it politics? Or did Neymar somehow pull off one of the most unbelievable comebacks football has ever seen? Because once you see everything that happened behind the scenes, you'll understand why many fans believe Neymar didn't earn his place at the 2026 World Cup. He somehow scammed his way into it. To understand how Neymar ended up at the 2026 World Cup despite everything that happened, you first have to understand who Neymar is to Brazil. Because for most countries, this conversation wouldn't even exist. If a player spent years battling injuries, missed huge portions of seasons, constantly found himself in controversies, and struggled to stay fit, the decision would be easy. He wouldn't be selected. But Neymar isn't just another player. For more than a decade, Neymar has been the face of Brazilian football. Ever since he burst onto the scene at Santos as a teenager, he carried expectations that few athletes in world football have ever experienced. He wasn't simply viewed as a future star. He was viewed as the chosen one. The player who would bring Brazil back to the top of world football. The player who would finally become the heir to Pelé. The player who would restore the magic that fans believed had been missing from the national team. From the moment he arrived in Europe, those expectations only grew stronger. At Barcelona, Neymar formed one of the most feared attacking trios in football history alongside Lionel Messi and Luis Suarez. Defenders couldn't stop them. Fans couldn't get enough of them. Trophies kept arriving. Then came the move to Paris Saint-Germain, a transfer so massive that it shocked the entire football world. For the first time, Neymar was no longer playing beside Messi. He was supposed to become the main man, the centerpiece, the superstar, the player who would finally step out of everyone else's shadow. At times, he looked capable of doing exactly that. His numbers were incredible. His skill level was outrageous. On his best days, he looked completely unstoppable. But there was always one problem: injuries. Every season seemed to follow the same pattern. Neymar would start brilliantly. He would dominate matches. People would begin discussing him as one of the best players in the world. Then another injury would arrive. And another. And another. Slowly, the conversations around Neymar started changing. Instead of talking about what he had achieved, people began talking about what he could have achieved. Instead of discussing trophies, they discussed missed opportunities. Instead of celebrating his greatness, they debated whether he had wasted his potential. By the time the 2022 World Cup ended, Neymar's international future was already uncertain. Brazil had once again fallen short. Another generation had failed to deliver the trophy the country desperately wanted. He was approaching the later stages of his career. The clock was ticking. Then things became even worse. After leaving Europe, Neymar's career entered perhaps the most chaotic period it had ever seen. The injuries became more serious. The recoveries became longer. The criticism became louder. At one point, it felt like every week brought a new setback, a new injury report, a new controversy. a new reason for people to question whether he still belonged at the highest level. Many fans started believing they had already seen the last great chapter of Neymar's career. Even some of his strongest supporters were beginning to accept that reality. Football is ruthless. The game moves on quickly. New stars emerge. New heroes are created. And Brazil suddenly had plenty of exciting young players ready to take over. Rodrigo, Vinicius Jr., Endrick, Estevao. A new generation was arriving. The assumption was simple. Brazil would move forward without Neymar. But Neymar wasn't ready to disappear. No matter how many injuries he suffered, no matter how many critics mocked him, no matter how many people claimed his best days were over, he refused to accept that the story had ended. That determination is what ultimately brought him back to Santos. For Neymar, it wasn't just a transfer. It was a rescue mission, a chance to reconnect with a club where everything had started, a chance to remind Brazil who he was, and most importantly, a chance to keep alive one final dream: the 2026 World Cup. Everything suddenly revolved around that goal. Every recovery session, every comeback attempt, every interview, every promise, every risk. Neymar made it clear that one thing mattered above everything else. He wanted one final shot at football immortality. The problem was that reality kept getting in the way. His body continued breaking down. His performances remained inconsistent. His off-field headlines often overshadowed his football. And as the months passed, the possibility of making the World Cup started looking more unrealistic than ever. Yet somehow, despite all the setbacks, despite all the criticism, and despite every reason to believe it wouldn't happen, Neymar kept finding ways to stay in the conversation. And as the countdown to the 2026 World Cup grew shorter, Brazil found itself facing an uncomfortable question. Was Neymar still a washed-up superstar living off his reputation? Or was he still the one player capable of changing everything when the biggest stage arrived? The answer to that question would spark one of the most controversial selection debates in Brazilian football history. If Neymar's story was supposed to be a comeback story, then this is the chapter where everything started going wrong. Because when he returned to Santos, the expectations were enormous. Thousands of fans packed the stadium. Television cameras followed his every move. The Brazilian media treated his arrival like the return of a national hero. For a moment, it felt like time had been turned back. The same club where Neymar first became a superstar. The same jersey. The same number. The same dream. And standing in front of the supporters, Neymar made a promise. He wasn't back for a farewell tour. He wasn't back to collect a paycheck. He wasn't back to enjoy retirement. He was back because he still had unfinished business. More specifically, he had one final mission: the 2026 World Cup. Everything he did from that moment forward was supposed to be focused on proving he deserved a place in Brazil's squad. At least, that was the plan. Reality had other ideas. The first warning signs appeared almost immediately. In his debut, Neymar showed flashes of the brilliance that made him famous. The touch was still there. The creativity was still there. The confidence was still there. Every time he touched the ball, fans could feel something happening. But there was also something else. Fragility. Every challenge seemed dangerous. Every tackle made supporters nervous. Every fall to the ground felt like a potential disaster. And that fear wasn't imaginary, because over the previous few years, Neymar's body had become his biggest enemy. The player who once danced through defenders effortlessly was now constantly fighting to stay healthy. The player who used to terrify opponents was now terrified of another injury setback. For a while, though, things actually looked promising. Neymar started creating chances. He started collecting assists. He started producing moments of magic. There were flashes of the old Neymar. The Neymar who could decide a match with a single touch. The Neymar who could embarrass defenders. The Neymar who made impossible things look routine. Then came the goals. Then came the headlines. Then came the excitement. Suddenly, people weren't laughing anymore. They were paying attention. And that's exactly when everything began to collapse. Because just as the momentum started building, Neymar disappeared from training. At first, the explanations sounded harmless. Club officials insisted everything was under control. There was no reason to panic. Nothing serious. Just precautionary work. just recovery sessions, just minor fitness concerns, the usual football excuses. But as the days passed, those explanations became harder and harder to believe. The situation reached a breaking point during one of Santos' most important matches of the season. Neymar was technically available. His name was on the team sheet. Fans expected him to play. The cameras followed him constantly. Then something strange happened. He got up to warm up, took a few steps, stopped, and immediately sat back down. The look on his face told everyone the truth before the club could. He was injured. Again, the stadium atmosphere changed instantly. What was supposed to be a triumphant comeback had suddenly become another medical disaster. The timing couldn't have been worse. Brazil's World Cup preparations were already beginning. National team discussions were heating up. Players were fighting for spots. Managers were taking notes. And Neymar was once again sitting on the sidelines, watching, waiting, recovering. The same cycle that had haunted him for years was repeating itself. Only this time, he had less time than ever before. Every week mattered. Every match mattered. Every opportunity mattered. And Neymar was losing all of them. But if injuries were damaging his chances, what happened next nearly destroyed them completely. Because while he was struggling to stay fit, stories about his behavior off the pitch started dominating the news. One controversy followed another. Reports claimed he was attending parties. Photos surfaced online. Questions started spreading across Brazilian media. Was Neymar truly focused on football? Was he taking his comeback seriously? Or was he simply enjoying the spotlight while pretending to chase a World Cup dream? The criticism grew louder every week. Former players began attacking him publicly. Pundits questioned his commitment. Fans started losing patience. Even people who desperately wanted Neymar to succeed were running out of excuses. Then came one of the most damaging moments of all. A respected former Brazilian international exploded during a television appearance. He accused Neymar of treating Santos like a vacation resort. He questioned whether the star genuinely cared about the club. He questioned whether football was still his priority. And most importantly, he questioned whether Brazil should continue believing in him. The comments spread everywhere. Social media exploded. Debates erupted across television and radio. Suddenly, Neymar wasn't being discussed as Brazil's savior. He was being discussed as Brazil's problem. The pressure became unbearable. And then something happened that made everything even worse. Neymar's own father stepped in. Most people expected him to defend his son. Most people expected him to silence the critics. Instead, his comments created an entirely new controversy. According to Neymar's father, the entire project at Santos was focused on recovery, getting fit, rebuilding physically, preparing for the future. The statement sounded innocent, but fans immediately noticed something. It completely contradicted everything Neymar himself had promised. He had claimed he returned to help Santos, to fight for the club, to lead on the pitch. Now it sounded like Santos was simply being used as a rehabilitation center, a stepping stone, a temporary stop on the road to the World Cup. The backlash was brutal. Supporters felt betrayed. Journalists intensified their criticism. And Neymar's reputation took another massive hit. But the worst part wasn't the criticism. It wasn't the injuries. It wasn't even the controversies. The worst part was what happened every time Neymar actually got back onto the pitch. Because just when he seemed ready to silence everyone, disaster kept finding him. A controversial handball goal, a red card, more fitness concerns, more setbacks, more embarrassing headlines. At times, it felt almost impossible. Every opportunity to rebuild his image somehow turned into another reason for people to doubt him. And this is where the first major twist of the story arrives. Because despite all the injuries, despite all the criticism, despite all the chaos, despite everything working against him, Neymar still wasn't finished. In fact, something strange was beginning to happen. Every time people declared his World Cup dream dead, he somehow found a way back into the conversation. A brilliant assist, a stunning goal, a moment of magic, a reminder of who he used to be. The flashes were becoming impossible to ignore, and that created a dangerous problem for Brazil. Because while Neymar's body looked broken, while his reputation looked damaged, and while his career appeared to be falling apart, his talent was still there. And deep down, everyone knew it. The fans knew it. The media knew it. His teammates knew it. And most importantly, Carlo Ancelotti knew it. The question was no longer whether Neymar deserved a place at the World Cup. The question was whether Brazil could afford to leave him at home. And that debate was about to become even more explosive. At this point, Neymar's World Cup dream should have been over. Seriously, if you looked at the facts alone, there was no logical argument left. He couldn't stay healthy. He couldn't avoid controversy. He couldn't put together a consistent run of matches. And with Brazil producing exciting young stars every season, there were plenty of alternatives waiting for their chance. For most players, that would have been the end of the discussion. But Neymar was never treated like most players. And that is exactly where things became dangerous. Because while critics were busy counting his failures, Neymar was quietly doing something that kept changing the conversation. Whenever the pressure became unbearable, whenever fans started writing him off, whenever the media declared him finished, he would produce a moment of brilliance. One goal, one assist, one magical performance, just enough to remind everyone why his name refused to disappear. It became a frustrating cycle. Every time people reached a conclusion about Neymar, he gave them a reason to doubt themselves. And nowhere was that more obvious than during Santos' battle for survival. The club was falling apart. Results were terrible. Confidence was disappearing. The threat of relegation was becoming very real. For Neymar, this was supposed to be the perfect opportunity. If he could save Santos, he could rebuild his reputation. If he could lead them through the crisis, he could prove he still belonged among football's elite. Instead, disaster struck again. Another injury, another setback, another medical report. This time, the situation looked even worse. Doctors believed surgery would be required. The timing couldn't have been more devastating. The World Cup was getting closer. Every week lost was another step away from Brazil's squad. Many people assumed this was finally the end. No player could keep surviving these setbacks forever. No player could keep escaping reality. No player could continue receiving chances after so many disappointments. At least that's what everyone thought. Then Neymar made a shocking decision. Instead of immediately undergoing surgery, he reportedly chose to delay it. He wanted to keep playing. He wanted to help Santos survive. And most importantly, he wanted to keep his World Cup hopes alive. It was an enormous gamble. One wrong move could destroy the rest of his career. One bad tackle could end everything. But Neymar no longer had the luxury of playing it safe. Time was running out. And suddenly, something incredible happened. The same player who had spent months being mocked across Brazil began carrying Santos when they needed him most. Goals started arriving. Assists followed. Victories returned. The atmosphere around the club changed completely. For the first time in months, Neymar wasn't making headlines because of controversy. He was making headlines because of football. The player everyone had written off was suddenly becoming the difference maker again. Then came the performance that changed everything. With Santos desperately fighting to avoid disaster, Neymar delivered one of his best displays in years. Goal, 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 a hat trick, in less than 20 minutes. Just like that, the conversation changed. The critics who had spent months attacking him suddenly found themselves facing an uncomfortable reality. Neymar was still capable of deciding matches on his own, even after the injuries, even after the controversies, even after all the ridicule. The talent was still there, and that was exactly what made the situation so complicated. Because now Brazil faced a problem. If Neymar was truly finished, leaving him out would be easy. But what if he wasn't? What if those performances weren't exceptions? What if he still had enough quality to change a World Cup match? What if Brazil left him at home and regretted it forever? Those questions started spreading through Brazilian football. Television debates became more intense. Former players split into opposing camps. Some argued that Neymar's experience was irreplaceable. Others insisted that selecting him would be rewarding failure. The nation was divided. Then came the shocking reveal. The debate had become so massive that it reportedly reached the highest levels of Brazilian society. Politicians were discussing Neymar. Former legends were discussing Neymar. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. And behind the scenes, Carlo Ancelotti was quietly watching everything. The new Brazil manager had inherited an impossible decision. Choose form or choose greatness. Choose reliability or choose Neymar. Because the more Ancelotti analyzed the situation, the harder the answer became. On one side were younger players, healthier players, more reliable players, players who had earned their opportunities through consistency. On the other side was Neymar, a walking risk, a constant controversy, a medical nightmare, but also the most naturally gifted Brazilian footballer of his generation. And that's when the shocking truth started becoming clear. This was never just a football decision. It was an emotional decision, a symbolic decision, a legacy decision. Whether people wanted to admit it or not, Neymar's name carried weight that statistics couldn't measure. His presence changed expectations. His reputation changed locker rooms. His history changed conversations. Even when injured, he remained the center of attention. Even when struggling, people couldn't stop talking about him. Even when failing, he remained impossible to ignore. And that reality was slowly pulling him closer to the World Cup squad. But just as everything finally seemed to be moving in his favor, just as the call-up debate was turning positive, just as Neymar looked closer than ever to completing his comeback, fate delivered one final cruel twist. The day before the most important squad announcement of his life, Neymar felt pain again. This time, it was his calf. Players, coaches, and fans watched nervously. No one knew how serious it was. No one knew whether it would affect the selection. No one knew whether months of work had just been destroyed in a single moment. But what happened next would send Brazilian football into absolute chaos. Because despite the injury, despite the concerns, despite every warning sign imaginable, Carlo Ancelotti was about to make the most controversial decision of his entire Brazil career. The moment Carlo Ancelotti announced Neymar's name, Brazilian football exploded. It wasn't just a squad announcement anymore. It was a national debate. Within minutes, social media was flooded with reactions. Some fans celebrated as if Brazil had already won the World Cup. Others were furious. For months, supporters had been told that selection would be based on form, fitness, and performance. Yet somehow, a player who had spent much of the previous 2 years injured had secured one of the most coveted spots in world football. To Neymar's supporters, the decision was obvious. This wasn't just another player. This was Neymar, Brazil's all-time leading goal scorer, one of the most gifted footballers the country had ever produced, a player capable of deciding a match with a single touch. They argue that talent like that could never be ignored. According to them, tournaments aren't won by statistics. They are won by moments. And no Brazilian player in the squad had produced more unforgettable moments than Neymar. Supporters pointed to his performances whenever he had been fit. They pointed to the goals, the assists, the flashes of brilliance, the matches where he single-handedly transformed Santos' season. To them, leaving Neymar at home would have been football madness. But the other side was just as loud. Critics couldn't believe what they were seeing. Former players, journalists, and television pundits immediately began questioning the decision. Many argued that the selection sent the wrong message. What exactly were younger players supposed to think? Spend an entire season performing at a high level, stay healthy, remain professional, avoid controversy, and still lose your place to a player who had barely completed a full stretch of matches. That argument gained traction quickly, particularly among supporters of several younger Brazilian stars who had spent months fighting for recognition. To them, Neymar's call-up felt less like a football decision and more like a reward for reputation. One television debate after another turned into a battlefield. Former professionals were split down the middle. Some insisted Neymar's experience would be priceless in a tournament environment. Others argued that football should reward current performance, not past achievements. The disagreement became so intense that even neutral observers found themselves choosing sides. Then came the reactions from inside the football industry itself. Club executives, former managers, scouts, analysts. Everyone seemed to have an opinion. Many acknowledged the same uncomfortable truth. On paper, Neymar probably didn't deserve the call-up. But football isn't played on paper. It's played under pressure. And when the pressure becomes unbearable, Few players in world football possess Neymar's ability to create something out of nothing. That argument kept appearing everywhere. No matter how much criticism he received, people couldn't ignore his unique talent. The more experts discussed the issue, the more obvious the dilemma became. There wasn't a right answer. There was only risk. If Ancelotti selected Neymar and he failed, the manager would be blamed for trusting an aging superstar. If Ancelotti left him out and Brazil struggled creatively, he would be blamed for abandoning the country's most gifted player. Either way, criticism was guaranteed. Meanwhile, the reaction from Neymar's teammates was noticeably different. Many current players openly welcomed the decision. For younger members of the squad, Neymar had been their idol growing up. Several had spent their childhood watching him dominate for Santos, Barcelona, and Brazil. The opportunity to share a World Cup dressing room with him felt special. Some players publicly praised his leadership. Others highlighted the confidence his presence brought to the group. To them, Neymar wasn't merely another squad member. He was a symbol, a connection between generations, a reminder of Brazil's footballing identity. Still, not everyone inside football was convinced. Several respected commentators openly mocked the situation. One former Brazilian star famously joked that Neymar's World Cup preparation consisted of more photographs than training sessions. The comment quickly went viral. Memes flooded social media. Football pages shared clips nonstop. And once again, Neymar became the center of online attention. But perhaps the most painful reaction came from the players who missed out. Every squad announcement creates winners and losers. This one was no different. For some players, Neymar's inclusion likely meant the end of their World Cup dream. Months of hard work, years of preparation, an entire career built around reaching this moment. Gone. And many fans couldn't stop wondering whether those players had been sacrificed for a gamble. Because that's what Neymar represented now. Not certainty, not reliability. A gamble. A very expensive gamble. A gamble on talent. A gamble on experience. A gamble on memories of greatness. As the debate intensified, one thing became impossible to deny. No player at the tournament carried more pressure than Neymar. Not because he was expected to win the World Cup. Not because he was expected to score the most goals. But because half the country believed he shouldn't even be there. Every touch would be analyzed. Every mistake would be criticized. Every injury scare would create panic. Every success would reignite the argument. And as Brazil prepared for the biggest tournament in football, Neymar found himself facing the most important challenge of his entire career. He had finally made the World Cup squad. Now he had to prove that everyone who doubted him was wrong. For a brief moment, it looked like the story was finally over. Neymar had done it. Against all odds. Against the injuries. Against the criticism. Against the endless controversies. Against the thousands of fans and analysts who insisted his time was up. His name was on Brazil's World Cup squad. Mission accomplished, or so everyone thought. Because just when the celebrations began, the entire situation took one final, unbelievable turn. Remember that calf problem Neymar suffered right before the squad announcement? The injury many people were told wasn't serious. The knock that was supposedly minor. The issue that wasn't expected to keep him out for long? Well, it turned out reality was very different. As soon as Neymar joined the national team setup, Brazil's medical staff started conducting their own examinations. And what they discovered immediately raised alarm bells. This wasn't a simple discomfort. This wasn't routine soreness. This wasn't the type of injury players recover from in a few days. The problem was significantly worse than expected. Suddenly, the player who had just secured one of the most controversial World Cup call-ups in Brazilian history wasn't training. He wasn't preparing. He wasn't building chemistry with teammates. He wasn't even participating fully with the squad. Instead, he was back where he had spent so much of the previous 2 years. Inside medical rooms, receiving treatment, trying to convince his body to cooperate. The reaction was immediate. Brazilian football entered full panic mode. The same fans who had spent weeks arguing about whether Neymar deserved a place in the squad were now asking a completely different question. Would he even be fit enough to play? Because if the answer was no, then everything suddenly looked disastrous. The critics felt vindicated. They argued this was exactly what they had warned about from the beginning. How could Brazil build its plans around a player whose biggest opponent wasn't another football team, but his own body? Television debates exploded again. Social media erupted. Every update became breaking news. Every medical report created new speculation. Every photograph of Neymar walking, stretching, or training was analyzed like evidence in a criminal investigation. Nobody knew what to believe. And somehow, the story became even stranger. While Brazil worried about Neymar's condition, stories began circulating about how little actual football preparation he had completed before joining the squad. The joke spread quickly. Former players mocked the situation. Commentators questioned the entire process. Memes flooded the internet. To many observers, it felt absurd. Brazil had selected Neymar because of what he might do at the World Cup, but nobody could even guarantee he would be available when the tournament started. And yet, despite all the chaos, despite all the criticism, despite all the uncertainty, something fascinating was happening. Ancelotti never changed his position. The manager never publicly expressed regret. He never suggested Neymar's selection had been a mistake. He never backed away from his decision. In fact, the longer the controversy continued, the more determined he seemed to defend it. And that's what made this story so intriguing. Because deep down, Ancelotti clearly believed something that many others didn't. He believed Neymar was still worth the risk. Even after everything. Even after the injuries. Even after the scandals. Even after years of disappointment. One of the most successful managers in football history looked at Neymar and still saw a player capable of changing a World Cup. The question is, was he right? Because now Brazil finds itself entering the biggest tournament on earth, carrying perhaps the greatest gamble of the entire competition. If Neymar returns and delivers, this decision will be remembered as a masterstroke. The ultimate redemption story. Proof that greatness never truly disappears. But if his body breaks down again, if he misses crucial matches, if Brazil falls short once more, then this call-up won't be remembered as a bold decision. It will be remembered as one of the biggest mistakes in World Cup history. And that leaves us with one final question. Did Neymar pull off the most unbelievable comeback football has ever seen? Or did he simply convince an entire nation to believe in him one last time before everything came crashing down? Because the World Cup is about to begin. And for Neymar, the verdict is finally coming. So what do you think? Did Neymar truly earn his place at the 2026 World Cup? Or was this one of the biggest gambles Brazilian football has ever taken? When you look at the full story, it's almost impossible to find a simple answer. On one hand, the injuries were undeniable. The controversies never seemed to stop. The mismatches kept piling up. And there were plenty of younger players who appeared more deserving based on form and fitness alone. But on the other hand, this is Neymar we're talking about. A player who has spent more than a decade producing moments that most footballers can only dream about. A player capable of changing an entire match with a single pass, a single dribble, or a single shot. And maybe that's exactly why this debate became so intense. Because Neymar isn't judged like normal players. He's judged against his own legend. Now the World Cup will decide everything. If Neymar delivers, the critics will be silenced. If Brazil succeeds, Ancelotti will look like a genius. But if things go wrong, people will point back to this decision for years. One tournament, one opportunity, one final chance to prove that the gamble was worth it. So now it's your turn. Do you think Neymar deserved to be selected for Brazil's 2026 World Cup squad? Or do you believe another player should have received that spot instead? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear both sides of the argument. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss future football stories, controversial debates, and deep dives into the biggest moments in the sport. Because this Neymar story isn't over yet. In fact, the most important chapter is only just beginning.